ceremonies. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. I always...
We can.
Okay, fantastic. So lovely. So we're going to be talking about how to run and different sprint ceremonies, what are the purpose of those ceremonies, and how do you foster cross-functional collaboration with your team and different stakeholders across an organization. So the goals of this session is to understand the why behind each Scrum ceremony, understand how you facilitate as a product manager to lead these ceremonies effectively, solve challenges, when they arise, because they always do arise, and any tools that you can maybe take home with you, templates and things like that, that can really help you to perform well when you are running different ceremonies. So why do sprint ceremonies matter? It's really important to align on value. What are you doing for the customers? What are you doing for the organization? What are the goals? And how does this particular sprint help the team to meet those goals? Who is the number one priority when it comes to building certain parts of the features? You have certain features that have a big emphasis on design, so there's a big priority there for your design team members, but there are others that have a very big, heavy back-end focus from a database perspective, or just making sure like the whole thing doesn't crash. So you need to be aligned on that. You need to establish a rhythm, so have a consistent expectation and cadence for when you will talk about delivery or have a delivery of a specific feature and actually get feedback on that. Having feedback loops is very important, so that is why the sprint ceremonies matter. You're able to talk about risks early, identify them, and hopefully that won't slow you down and slow down the momentum of the sprint and for the entire team. And build ownership. You're able to assign responsibility, tasks and roles to each individual within your team, which helps for better alignment and in general better collaboration. So the purpose, one of the ones, what I should have done is make a list of all the different types of sprint ceremonies, but I will summarize for you. So if we're thinking about a timeline, what you always would start with is sprint planning. You bring the team together, that is your dev, your QAs, your designers, front end and back end devs. If you're working with AI, it would be your AI engineers, analysts, whoever is in your team from a feature development perspective. Everybody comes together for a session. This session can be, it really depends on the size of your team, and it depends on the complexity of your product, as in the entire product offering that you work on. But for a lot of teams, it ranges from about an hour to 2 hours. You may not always use that allotted time, but it is a set meeting. Again, this will also depend on how frequently you do your sprints. So every company varies. Ideally, you should have a 2-week sprint. It really depends on, again, the complexity of the product that you're working on. Let's say you work in, I don't know, Revolut. Depending on because it can be quite complex in terms of the level of integrations. You then have the added complexity of keeping people's information safe. So all of those things will add more complexity and more I would say checking, for lack of a better word, if I'm not going to be technical. I would call it QA, but essentially when you have a product that you're building that is focused on obviously something really high risk like money, and you have the responsibility of making sure that money ends up in the right place, that it ends up to the right person, that you prevent fraud, that you are protecting people's identity and sensitive information. Even when you are adding a feature that has nothing to do with, the actual sending of money, it could just be making the experience better. You still will need to test to make sure that from a data protection perspective, from an ease perspective, from a fraud prevention perspective, your feature still aligns with those principles, because it's important. It's the bedrock of the entire product. Again, if we're using Revolut as an example. So in that case, you might have a sprint session that is much longer to account for that time where you are doing those additional GDPR and data safety checks for that reason. So a typical sprint should be 2 weeks. It can be 3 weeks. It can be 4. It really depends on your organization. And this occurs before you started your sprint. So let's say we're starting a sprint on Monday. You would do your sprint planning ideally today, or you would do it on Friday, but you do it beforehand, and you'd give everybody a chance to align and understand exactly what, you know, has been done. So the purpose of a sprint is to kind of select work items. You have your backlog of different types of tickets, and you want to actually have a goal for this sprint. Okay, we want to be able to close out version 1 of our international payments feature, for example, and that is the goal for the sprint. You would align all the tickets, all the work items. We were speaking about tickets just at the beginning of this. All the tickets that you have in your backlog related to V1 of this feature would be what you would select for your sprint planning. You want to refine the backlog based on that, understand the team's capacity, because generally speaking, in an organization, there will always be overflow. You might have just finished a sprint and there might be items that weren't able to be addressed in that, and they are moved over to your next sprint planning session. As a result, you really want to understand what everyone's capacity is like. You know, if some people have some work that they still need to finish off from the previous sprint, that needs to factor into your planning. And then having a general definition that is understood between everybody about what the definition of ready is. What does it mean when this feature is ready? What does it mean when this ticket is ready? And your role as a PM is to really clarify what the value is, what the purpose of this particular sprint is, negotiate on scope. So what I think a lot of people make a mistake of doing is like they just dump things in the sprint and that's it, but that's not how it works. You might have an intention to completely close off a feature in a particular sprint, but often because of capacity, sometimes you have to tackle tech debt, which I'll get onto in a minute. But there are so many other competing priorities in addition to maybe a new feature or an improvement that you'd like to make to an existing feature. And as such, you know, you have to negotiate with your team about what the scope of this particular sprint should be. Is it that we finish a particular feature, or is it just that we get halfway? You know, and really discuss that with your team and talk about the trade-offs of, like, for example, okay, we're not finishing this feature. What is the trade-off of that? Customers have to wait longer. Maybe management won't be happy with that, you know, different types of things. So those are very important. One thing to mention is that as a PM, you should come to the sprint planning sessions with tickets ready. And I will go into that in a little more detail a bit later, but your tickets should be ready. You should have spoken with your design team or a designer within your team, lead dev or something, or QA, and you guys together talk about those tickets, refine those tickets, make sure it's ready. So when you go into sprint planning, it's more about assigning team capacity and understanding what it is that you want to do, rather than you writing tickets right in the session. Sometimes you need to make edits to things based on discussions, but generally speaking, it should be that the items that you have in mind should be ready to be discussed and have a lot of clarity in the ticket, so that team members are able to review beforehand or get to grips with it quickly within the actual sprint planning session. So you have a daily scrum, and really what this is just, it's meant to be a quick fire meeting. The idea is that, you know, but again, it depends on the size of your team. I've put 15 minutes here, but it doesn't have to be 15 minutes. If you have quite a large team, it might have to be a bit longer. But the idea is that it really should be like a very small amount of time, going in order, going around the team. Right, what do you have to do? What have you gotten done? Do you have any blockers? Yes, no. What are those blockers? Okay. And it's not about problem solving in the exact daily scrum. It's about making any risks or issues known, so that can be discussed after the meeting. You know, straight away, okay, so-and-so has a blocker with this. I need to put some time in with them today so that we can address this. It's about structured participation. You as a PM are really just a listener. You're not a taskmaster. It's not for you per se. Like, obviously there's a fine balance. Sometimes you need to be on top of anything that slips, but it's more about asking questions and addressing any issues offline. For teams that are distributed, you're all in different time zones, doing stand-ups via Slack can be really useful, and you can just do it async. Some members might not be able to join at the time that you're available, but just making sure you have time with your team members, with your stakeholders on a daily basis, where you quickly talk about what's been done, anything that's left, and any issues is very important. So that's another ceremony, daily scrum, or a stand-up as people call it. You then have backlog refinement, and this can be This can be either a standalone meeting, or it can be something that you do. It can be both, essentially. It's classed as a ceremony, and really you should have a backlog refinement meeting, but this may not always be to the same frequency as like a sprint planning meeting that you do at the beginning of each sprint. Again, it depends on the organization. I think for good practice, it should be something that's done regularly, once a month, once every 3 weeks, something like that. So you read, and really once at the end of each sprint, you really should understand, okay, are there issues that have been there for ages that we just actually, they're no longer relevant? Are there things that actually maybe we've neglected and we need to move higher up on the list? And maybe that's the next thing for the sprint. So it's an ongoing process. And it can't just be ad hoc when you know a sprint session is coming. It should be something you really try to keep on top of. It's something, when it comes to grooming, it's also about the details in the ticket. So you might have something in your backlog about, I don't know, a bug that a customer has raised, and you've just put it there. Someone's put it there as a placeholder, but it doesn't actually have the level of detail needed for it to be sprint ready. So you as a PM, you bring together your developer, your QA, sometimes design, to really collaborate on the story details and make sure that those elements are all there, so that if somebody is just perusing, maybe they're having a look at the backlog, maybe they have more time, they've finished their items for the sprint, and so they want to look at the backlog and see if there's anything that they could just pick up quickly. They're able to do that because things are ready. You want to have clear acceptance criteria within that ticket, have an estimation around time, and that's why you need to have your developer and QA there, because together they'll be able to give you an estimate of how long it would actually take to complete that specific task, and make sure that the technical questions are answered. Story mapping. So you want to be able to provide information on what the user journey flow is, to identify any gaps and dependencies, e.g., okay, this includes, SSO. So that is kind of a dependency that needs to be factored into the development of, this particular feature. So again, this can be a session that you have all together. It doesn't have to be something that's always in the diary, although that's preferable, to make sure that people understand, again, you as a PM, your developer, your QA, understand that this is a session that you all need to have together. It's in the diary, and understanding exactly what the purpose is also very important. You then have a sprint review. So you want to really make sure that you introduce the sprint goal, you have set the customer value proposition, you demo the working software, and you gather feedback. So this is at the end of a sprint, and it's not to be confused with a retrospective. At the end of the sprint, you want to have almost like a demo. It could be a showcase of what has been completed and what you intended to do, what the goal of that particular sprint was, and how the team were able to achieve that. So demoing quick features, it can be a recorded like Loom video or something like that. And this is very good, not just for your team, your development team, but also for people across the organization. You have customer success and account managers and other people, marketing, other people within the organization who are very dependent on the work that is done within each sprint. So even just giving a quick show and tell, so that they're able to see exactly what has been done, what progress has been made on a particular feature, how it actually works, is very, very important. And getting that feedback from people who spend the most time with customers as well is also really important. Maybe, you missed something, and that can be something you put into the next sprint to iterate on. But it's very important to give the team, the wider organization, the ability to see very clearly what has been done within a sprint. You then have the sprint retrospective. So this is about really discussing within your team, as in QA, developers, yourself, design, really having a discussion about what has been done in the sprint, what could have been done better. And it's really important to make sure that it's a safe environment. You don't want people to feel blamed, because, for example, you have items that haven't been completed by certain members of the team. You don't want them to feel that they're being blamed, and there could be obviously a whole host of reasons for that. So you need it to be a safe environment. And for you as a PM, it's about balancing empathy with accountability. So, for example, someone might have not been able to get to a specific task because there was another task that they were focused on that was higher priority, but actually took longer to fulfill because of bugs and other things. In that instance, the kind of accountability, or the discussion there might be, to have more proactivity. So if you see that you're not able to complete something, let's have that discussion quicker within the sprint, things like that. So it's not about blame, it's just about honestly discussing how we can work better as a team to make sure that we achieve our sprint goals. I think a lot of people, or a lot of organizations, don't always measure sprints, but they are measured. You should be able to say, especially as a PM, you do have, whether or not you are a senior PM within the organization, sorry, generally speaking, there is some expectation that you can realistically measure how much work you can complete in a sprint, right? So when you join an organization, especially when it's a new team, sometimes it can take a bit of time to figure out what the balance is. People aren't always the greatest at estimating their level of capacity in any given week or 2-week time frame, and how much time it takes them to get work done. And that's fine. But the point of these retrospectives is to get closer to that, to get closer to a better estimate, so that you as your team can realistically say, okay, generally speaking, we complete, I don't know, 4 user stories in a sprint, in a 2-week sprint. So that's what we're going to use, right? Maybe initially you guys put 6 stories in a sprint, and you realized after 1, 2, 3, 4 sprints that you were always leaving about 40% of the items within a sprint undone, unfinished. So you really want to be able to get to a point where you can realistically estimate how much capacity each person has, and where you can identify issues that will put the sprint at risk of slipping backwards in terms of progress and in terms of completion. So there are different ways that you can do that. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can, for example, there's start, stop, continue. So each person in the team can say, what's one thing we should start doing? E.g., it could be maybe we should have midweek reviews of the sprint to see if there's anything that we're at risk of not completing. That could be something that somebody suggests we start. Stop, maybe we should stop, I don't know, having really long sprints. Maybe it's not conducive to the way that we work. And what should we continue? We can continue working well together. We can continue communicating. So there's different formats that you can use. And honestly, there's no right or wrong. You don't have to use a format, but what you want to get out of a sprint retrospective is the things that went well, the things that we could have done better, and the things that we should continue for next time. What should we think about for next time, for the next sprint? What is an important thing to keep in mind? So that is the aim of a retrospective. A lot of people try to skip it, but it is very important to learn lessons from every single sprint, so you can just work together more effectively as a team. And at the end of the day, you are accountable for the goal of the sprint. If the goal of the sprint is consistently missed, that can be a problem. So that it's very important to really bring the team together to reflect on what happened within the sprint. Even if everything went well, that's still a good thing to discuss. What did we do well, and how can we continue doing that in future? So that is the purpose of a sprint retrospective. Again, that usually occurs at the end of a sprint, and it can be between half an hour long, but it's not something you should bundle up. You should have one for each sprint, essentially. Any questions on sprints and the different ceremonies before I move on? Just jump out because I can't see you, so just unmute and talk if there's anything you have questions on. Okay, cool. No problem.
I have one that might be so just with regards to after you've done your retrospective and you are, you've decided that this is what was good and what was bad and all that stuff. How do you actually, what do you do with all the bad stuff? Basically?
Yeah, that is a good question. What I didn't mention is actually solutions. So how do we solve this problem? Let's say someone says communication wasn't really good in this sprint. I think that's for you as a PM to think about how you can make that better. Obviously, you feel free to discuss it with your team if you feel that that's the best thing to do, but it's really about making it actionable. So I think as a PM, once you've done the sprint retrospective, you really want to reflect on what didn't work, and what are the things that you can do and implement to make it better. Sometimes it's as simple as just like making a ticket clearer. Other times it's like having a bit of a checkpoint. Maybe you decide to have a checkpoint with each stakeholder. So it's thinking about what the solutions should be with that feedback that you get from the session. And sometimes it doesn't have to be you that's responsible for it. Maybe it's something you delegate to somebody else. But yeah, just thinking about how you can actually action that feedback is always really important.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's move on
Yes,
to.
I have a question in regards of that as well.
Yeah.
You said you discussed about what you will do better next time. Is that like documented on the meeting for you to go back at it maybe at the next retrospective meeting?
Good question. Yes, I did mention that. So retrospectives are always documented. It's very good to have, like, it could be just a folder, and every week you have like a template that says, let's say you use a start, stop, continue format. What you would maybe do is say to your team, hey guys, we have a retrospective on Friday. Can you fill in the template with all of your thoughts on the start, stop, and continue from the previous sprint? After the sprint, after the sprint retrospective, you've spoken about it, you just update that template with the notes and it would be dated. So yes, but it's always documented. And that's something I'm actually going to talk about a lot, but just generally in terms of sprints, when you are, different types of ceremonies, when you are working with teams, especially cross-functionally, and especially if people are based in different time zones, you have to remember communication is more than just what you say in meetings. It's also what people are able to refer back to. So having an effective means of documentation is very important. It doesn't have to be laborious. Like, it doesn't have to be 2, 3, 4 pages. You need to find a very delicate balance between giving enough information but not overloading people. And that will come with time, with experience in the organization, understanding how people communicate. For example, if you work with someone whose maybe first language isn't English, just having like blocks of like a long paragraph of information in a ticket is not going to be helpful. So things like using bullet points, using bold, using different colors, using a lot of spacing, that kind of thing is really useful. But the thing, generally speaking, your communication is what you say in meetings, but also people's ability to come back and reference that. So if you decide something in a team about what should be in a ticket or more detail, make sure to actually update that ticket. You can even text the person and say, hey, by the way, this has been updated. Like that, giving people the ability to come back and find information where it should be is very important. And making sure that they know where they can expect to find that information is also really important.
Thank you.
Sure. So go on. Oh, sorry, I can't see. So just be shouting. It's fine.
Sorry, I was just going to say, has there been a move towards using AI for sprint meetings, just to kind of like transcribe meetings so you have something to refer to?
Yeah, that is a good question. So yes, I think that, for example, like even Google, it has Gemini, so you can use that for minutes and just ask Gemini to summarize. I think that what you should do is a combination, in my opinion, because the way in which Gemini will record your meeting notes may not necessarily be conducive to like what you need to think of, especially as a product person with anything, but obviously related to this. If your head of product or your CPO wants to understand how you're getting on in the sprints and what feedback your team is giving about the sprints, not about you, but just about the sprints, they should be able to go in and at a glance understand it. And you don't want them to have to be reading through lots of minutes to really be able to quickly capture what each person has said. So I'd use a combination. Like if Gemini gives me minutes, I might use ChatGPT or another tool to put it in the format of my template so that anybody who wants to see what has been said, what has been discussed, can see it easily without like too much faff, basically. So yeah, people do use AI for that, and it's a great tool. It's a great tool for that. You just want to make sure that it aligns with how the company communicate documentation is what I would say.
Cool, that's great. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Okay, lovely. So let's move on to cross-functional collaboration touch points. So we spoke about, sprints and different ceremonies, and really one of the things that underpins your ability to have effective ceremonies is the work that you do in between those things. So having discovery workshops and design interviews. So before you even, let's say you have an initial idea for a feature you want to build, the next step is talking to design, talking out your idea with them. And it's never hard and fast. Maybe designers come to you with an idea, maybe you came up with the idea together, whatever the case may be. Is having those sessions with the design team and saying, hey, this is what we want to do, working out an initial kind of user journey, look and feel, UX, UI, and understanding whether you're both happy that it represents a solution for what the customer's problem is. Then you want to talk to engineering. Okay, like what are the things that we need to be mindful of? Is this too difficult? Do we need to break this up into multiple iterations? It's speaking to QA, understanding the definition of done, understanding how they do their regression testing, reviewing kind of test cases. How do they prepare their test cases? I think people sometimes miss out on QA, but it's a very fundamental part of the process, because if QA don't have a good understanding of what has been built, they don't know how to test it. And there needs to be an understanding of like what it means when the feature has failed, and when it's when a specific feature has passed testing and when it's failed testing. People don't always involve QA because they don't necessarily need to be involved in the design of a feature and how you're going to solve the solution. But at least when you've gotten to a stage where you're pretty confident that you've got a roadmap, should we say, or an outline for exactly how this feature is going to be built and what are the key elements that actually solve the customer's problems and the expected behavior, that should be really clear to QA. So touching base with QA throughout the sprint, in between sprints, is also really important. And go to market, like speaking to the marketing team, talking about what they need, how do they gather feedback from customers, what are the funnels for their feedback, what do they need in terms of launch? Okay, people are working on the sprint, the features being developed, what would they consider to be, launch ready? What are some of the things that I need to have ready from a launch perspective? So on my launch checklist, it might be customer facing notes, it might be release notes for the internal organization, it might be links to demos so that the customer facing teams can see that and understand exactly what the product, the feature does and what the benefit is to customers. So you want to have touch points with all of these different areas, and there are many more. But I think what you have to remember is that product and development is at the center of any organization, and everybody needs to understand what you've done. And it is a skill to communicate to each member of, or each of these different types of stakeholders in a way that makes sense to them. You don't want to talk to your marketing team in highly technical terms. You want them to understand what the value is so that they can market that to customers. That is what you want to do. You don't want to, overcomplicate your descriptions to them, stuff like that. With QA, obviously, you want to talk in technical terms, but you want to be very rigid about what does it mean when this feature is done? What does it mean when this feature has failed? What is the expected behavior? With your engineering team, it's a little bit more fluid. It could be, what are some of the bugs that you're having? This is what you expect the feature to do. Is there any delay in something? Are we blocked on something? I've written office hours there, but that depends on the scale of your team. So what a lot of organizations do, if they're quite large, is that they'll have opening hours, just for you to go. It might be the time that you use to go and pick their brain about a particular feature that you're thinking about, rather than having like a formal set meeting for every single thing. They might have opening hours, and you can just, office hours, that they just have someone there ready to discuss any and everything related to, obviously, feature development. And sometimes, depending on if you're a technical product manager, you might want to do a code review process and look at efficiencies in the code and ways that you can improve things or reduce latency, e.g. if you find that a particular feature is slow, like what can we do to improve that? So there are so many different points and opportunities that you as a PM have to collaborate with other members of your organization, and doing so will only make your sprints work more efficiently and effectively, because there's so many opportunities to communicate and be clear and be on the same page and align on what needs to be done, that by the time you go into the sprint meetings, everybody is clear. It's reflected in the tickets that you've written, it's reflected in the actual planning of the sprint session, and so people are, it's a much smoother process, and you can actually spend the time planning and prioritizing, which again you really should have done beforehand, but these things do change when you talk to, you know, members of your team. But it should try to be a streamlined process. You don't want there shouldn't be any surprises, or like, oh, I didn't know I had to do that, or I didn't think of that, or we have to pay for an additional, I don't know, storage space or something like that. So some stuff that can really enable that flow to work is obviously having a shared roadmap. And that could be your responsibility, the PM, it could be the responsibility of, you know, the higher ups per se, but having a roadmap so people understand like what it is that we're working towards, what are the goals of the company, and how is that reflected in the features that we build. Having like a collaboration canvas, so obviously Miro, FigJam, these boards that, especially when you're working hybrid, remote, or across different time zones, you want something that everybody can come into where our thinking has been mapped out and it's accessible for everyone. And this, for example, if you're doing a discovery workshop with your design team, or you're brainstorming a feature with design, with yourself and engineering, you can see the thinking, you can see the logic in the thinking, you can see the methodology that was used to arrive at, you know, the final solution that you've decided. So that those things are really important. And again, that's all part of the documentation. The documentation doesn't have to be, you know, a Word doc or Confluence page or something. It can be like a visual aid, like a Miro board that people can utilize to really see exactly how you got to where you got to in terms of your thinking. A sprint dashboard, obviously the Jira and Azure, I don't really like Azure like that, but Jira is a decent one, which people use for tracking work. As a PM, you go onto your Jira dashboard, you can see how many items are currently in progress, how many items are being reviewed by QA, how many items are done, how many like have a bug and maybe are a bit delayed, what's left to do. And obviously using things like Slack and Teams and other sorts of tools to communicate. You know, sometimes you just jump on a quick huddle. I think there's a very fine line between like meetings and just being async. You don't always want to fill up people's calendars with meetings all the time. You want to leverage people's free time and spontaneity and just say, hey, you free? Can we talk about this thing? Or hey, you free? Can we talk about that thing? So Slack and other sorts of channels are very useful for that. Some of like the common challenges when A, you're working cross-functionally, and B, you are planning sprints. Shifting priorities. So there's a lot of times, it's a very, very common pitfall when you are a PM working in organizations. Different people will have different perceptions of priority. So you might have, you know, a customer facing team who are used to, you know, they hear a lot of complaints from customers and they feel very strongly that we have to fix this feature, or we have to ship this new feature right away, right now. That really disrupts things. Obviously, I've spoken about having a distributed team, and then, you know, bridging the gap between technical and non-technical stakeholders, as I was speaking before, speaking in a language that they can understand for things that are to their benefit. Other common challenges are like balancing tech debt. So when you have a product that you've been building, there is inevitably going to be some things that you just need to mend for the maintenance of the platform and the longevity of the platform. And that can be a difficult balance to strike when you are a high growth organization, or just generally you really are focused on building features. When you're taking a time away from building new things to fix usually things that nobody understands, that can be a difficult balance to strike. And yeah, like I think managing the opinions of the person who has a large amount of influence versus data-driven decisions. So a lot of PMs, they really struggle. I think being a PM, you have to be quite assertive, because you'll have, you know, head of so-and-so and head of so-and-so and head of so-and-so spoken to this, you know, particular customer or this person or whatever. And that begins to be the voice that they listen to, rather than looking at the data, what the data tells them, what retention rates tell them, what adoption tells them, what the surveys tell them, or what customer feedback tells them about what customers actually want and need at this point in time, especially when you're balancing the needs of most of your customers with the needs of a small minority. What, you know, even though they are, all customers are important, you have to be able to balance those things. So that can be a difficult thing when you have someone who is really, really important in the organization kind of putting on that pressure to change kind of priorities during the sprint. So I had some scenarios, and one of them that I wanted to give was actually this one. So like, let's say you have a stand-up. Let's see, what's the best one to do? I think this is the one, actually, given what I've just said. So the situation, mid-sprint, a VP demands a new feature to be added immediately. The team have already committed to sprint goals and backlog items. What questions do you ask, and how do you protect the sprint goal? That's an open question to anybody who wants to answer.
I would probably just explain that we're currently working on this with a view of solving this problem. I understand that you want us to work on this feature, but just explain, like, realistically, well, we're working on this one, so which would you like us to prioritize, and allow him to make the decision?
Okay, I'll come back to what I would say is that's a very good answer. One thing you need to be mindful of is, honestly, having worked with like VPs and stuff, like people's minds change so quickly on what priorities are. And there's no one person in an organization who is well equipped enough to make a sole decision on what the priorities should be within an organization. Because you as a PM, you've already organized a sprint, you know what the priorities are, and you have data that can equip you on what those priorities should be. So I would say it's very difficult, but you don't want to give the VP the ability to choose what the priorities are, unless it's the VP of product. And even then, what you want to do is say, I'm going to look at what the data says and I'll come back to you. And what you do is you present both priorities against one another, and you say, this is what we have about this particular feature, this is what we have about this particular feature, and let the data speak for itself. When the data is clear that one is a priority over the other, then that, you know, that should be enough to really tell them in a polite way, you know, we're not going to do this feature right now because this is a higher priority based on customer feedback, you know, retention, account managers, you know, whatever it is. That's one. The second thing is, you really shouldn't be changing things ad hoc within a sprint. Like, there needs to be a really, really, really good reason to do so. Even if you have a feature that should ideally be top priority over what is currently in the sprint, when you are already underway, causing disruption because of a feature that is so important really isn't worth it more often than not. It can be something that you add, it can be something that you do immediately next in the next sprint. But again, even if the data says this is really important, there still has to be a very, very compelling reason to disrupt the sprint based on that. So those are the two things that I would say.
I just wanted to add that, well, not to your answer, but just generally speaking, we will be covering that as well in the practical aspects of this. So I will clarify after Teniola's done, and just kind of let you know like what the next steps are as to like us doing the practical aspects. But yes, we'll be covering prioritization, writing tickets, using Jira, all that good stuff. Basically everything she's mentioned in this session.
Yeah, I tried to give an overview, but yeah.
What was that?
Sorry, I'm saying I tried to give an overview. I tried trying to give an overview of everything. It can be very difficult to answer when you haven't got the actual tickets on screen. But just generally speaking, you have to try to be quite assertive and balance, because you are the one who's accountable for it. Because what happens is, if you add something that they demanded and the sprint, doesn't go well, it's going to be your fault. So you need to be able to manage that and have assurance that you've made the right decision and use data to back that up. So
It's definitely very difficult, isn't
It's
it?
hard.
Like on a practical level,
It
and
is.
particularly in like startups,
Yeah.
they need
Very
to change so often. Whereas in more established companies, maybe you have a little bit more time, and maybe you have like, you're not working as closely with the most difficult personalities. But in smaller companies, it can be really hard. So it's just about, there's a few tactics and stuff, but yeah, we'll definitely get into them. But yeah, like Teniola said, it's difficult to just like answer in one short go, I suppose.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think it's a balance. Like, so it's not that you don't ever move things within a sprint. It's just that you have to you have to make sure you use the methodology to weigh up the trade-offs of that. And maybe you take some stuff out that hasn't been started yet and you put this new feature in. But again, you need to make sure you're just, working in a data-driven manner. Okay, any other answers to questions about how you would protect the sprint goal in this scenario?
Sorry, did you say any other questions?
I meant to say any other responses? Like, how would you, anybody else, what questions would you ask if a VP was demanding to add a new feature, and how would you protect the sprint goal?
I would just add to that actually, and just say, and you probably already said this, and I was maybe a bit off with the wind, but I would just add to that and say that ultimately there's a roadmap, right? So whatever you're doing in the sprints will be reflected in the roadmap, as in, let's say the roadmap let's say we're launching, we've been using Summon, the dating app, as an example. So let's say we're launching Summon and our roadmap said we want to be able to implement our MVP first and launch our MVP features. So obviously in that sprint, what we're going to be covering is MVP features. Let's say a VP or me or whoever came to you as the PM and said, well, I want people to be able to video call each other. And I think that's really important. One thing I like to do is maybe give them homework as well and like say, okay, so can you prepare some documentation as to why we're doing this? Or I send them a form that I created myself. And it has like, okay, this is a feature request change thing. Can you just fill this in with like, all the information that we would need to get this started for you? And that task in itself, sometimes they don't actually do it because they realize then that it's actually not that important. And the contents of that form is what reveals to them that it's not as important as everything else. And I also communicate to them what they would be losing if we were to do that. So I would say, okay, you want video calls? Cool, you can have video calls, but we're not going to have this, that, and that. So all you're going to have is essentially a video calling app, and you're not going to have an actual dating app. So is that what you want? And then they go, oh, well, maybe further down the line. So yeah, you have to get really skilled with those rebuttals and creative, isn't it?
All of those things are basically data. You want to be able to present, and it's not about saying no, it's about saying, these are the two features side by side. If we do this, we're not having this. If we do this, we're not having that. This is what customers say about this one. Or if you don't have, usually you'd have that data, but if you don't, this is where we've rated this on the priority. This is where we've rated this on the priority initially. This is where it falls on the roadmap. Which trade-off do you want to make? Do you know what I mean? And that's a good way to kind of get people to see perspective when it comes to building features. Okay, so in terms of like metrics and continuous improvement, you want to.
Can I just add?
Sorry.
It's half question, half possible
sure.
answer. With what you've both been saying about specifically focusing on the data and stuff, I was thinking that it could be also good if maybe the VP was like really pushing you after you said that you weren't necessarily going to move forward with what they were thinking. About how you said, Barbie, about asking them to then present data to you. Kind of, it can be a way for them to think that it was their own decision to have it going in the way that you actually wanted it to go, which sometimes people that are a bit higher up kind of just want to feel like they've made the right decision. So by putting it back on them, it could be another way to just say, exactly, can you show me that data?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think it can be both, and sometimes people don't. Funnily enough, sometimes people ask you because they don't actually want ultimate responsibility for the decision. It can be both. It can be, you know, that they feel good that it was their decision, and sometimes it's like they're palming it off on you because they don't actually know. And they just want to say, you know, sometimes some of these things are just like they want to say that they've asked you. I've asked the product team, or the development team is working on it. They want to be able to say that, even though, you know, they've not actually really thought it through. So I think one thing that helps to frame it is like the VP is probably getting pressure from someone.
Okay.
Whether it's from himself or maybe the customers or the CEO, there's pressure coming from someone, and you have to work really hard to try and relieve that pressure in some way, and B, try and provide perspective and not allow yourself to be overly pressured by feelings and make an emotional decision. It's fine to change your mind. You just need to make sure that you're not doing it off of, you know, that feeling of pressure, because ultimately you will be responsible for the outcome. So you want to try and act from like really data driven as much as you can. And again, that data can just be, you know, someone in the marketing said whatever, or what customer said whatever. So yeah, it can be a bit of both, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on. So just to round up here, one of the things that you want to kind of try and do when you are running sprints is kind of have some metrics for improvement. So what is the sprint success? What is the goal rate, the goal success rate? Do you want to have 80% of your sprint completed? Is it 70%? Is it 90%? What is that kind of percentage, and what does that look like? How much of your stories from the previous sprint do you want there to be, you know, a carryover? And just monitoring that. If you're not happy with, I don't know, 40% of the previous sprint being added to a new sprint, and you want to work to get that down, what does that look like? What does a good percentage look like when it comes to a story carryover? Maybe for you want to get it to 10%, you know, so working towards that. How long does work actually take? So if we have a story that we've estimated is going to take 5 working days and it ends up taking 8 working days, are we actually good at estimating? How do we get more specific and better at our estimation as a team? And giving people anonymous surveys so we can understand more about, you know, how the actual sprint works. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable sharing everything in a retrospective because it is about people, you know, speaking up. So sometimes you want to give people the opportunity to do so anonymously if there are other, and just to uncover any other potential issues. So key takeaways: ceremonies are commitments. They're not just meetings. It's a commitment that drives accountability and alignment with the team. Your focus is about framing value clearly, facilitating the workflow efficiently, and clearing blockers. You want to have deliberate collaboration. It's designed, it's an intentional act as a PM to collaborate with different stakeholders, as I mentioned, with the design team or with the QA or with marketing. And you want to iterate on the process of your sprints. You don't just want to kind of do it and that's it. That's a point of retrospectives. You should shift the process in a way that aligns with your team and aligns towards success and the metrics that you chose, so that you are able to actually be more productive as a team. And yeah, is there any other questions before I finish off? Okay.
That was really interesting. Thank you, Teniola. But I just wanted to ask about you individually and your background, if you don't mind sharing how you got into product management.
Oh, good question. How did I get into product management? So I actually studied psychology, and I remember I was looking for like just some volunteer work to do when I had finished uni. So I was looking at doing some like market research for people, because that was quite a core part of my degree. And I ended up doing some market research for like one small business at the time, and they were looking to kind of expand their product offerings. I was just like interviewing people using Twitter polls and other tools back then to try and ascertain whether or not it was a feature that people wanted, whether they were interested in it, and that kind of ballooned and shaped into what we know now as product management. I didn't really understand it at the time or know what it was, but that's kind of how my journey started. I think people have everyone in product has like a different way in which they started in the role, and how there's no conventional way, I don't think. But yeah, that was what my journey was like. And from then, I worked at the company for about 5 years, and then I wanted to kind of have more experience working in like fintechs and other types of technical fields. So I kind of went on to start consulting. Actually, that's how I started, and started working in different types of organizations.
Cool, thank you. That's really interesting. And also, just in regards to your business that you started, so is it Chat KYC?
It is, yeah.
It just made me smile because I used to work as a conflict analyst in a past life. So yeah, I know a little bit about like KYC.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, how did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, good question. So it's actually a business my husband and I are starting, and he works in compliance. And I remember I was using, I think it was like the advent of like Chat PRD. Has anybody heard of Chat PRD?
No.
We're not introducing them to that just yet.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, fine. I'm not going to say too much of that. But it was a tool that I was using. And my husband would just complain, like, oh my gosh, like I wish there was something that I could use for compliance. And I was like, well, maybe we should just create one. And that's basically how the idea came about, because he was just complaining about it. And I was like, well, we could build something focused for compliance people, compliance. I know tech, sort of. So maybe we could do something. And that's kind of how the idea came about. So yeah, we'll see where it goes. It's launching soon-ish. I haven't really... Say that again?
It's going to be great.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, so I haven't publicly like launched it or whatever. It's not even on my LinkedIn yet, but yeah, that's how the idea came about.
Oh, cool. I think that's a great idea, and I'm sure it will do really well, because
Thank you.
as someone who worked in like that space, just even trying to understand ownership structures. When I worked as a conflict analyst, I did it abroad.
Okay.
So I really was not aware of like ownership structures of their businesses. So having something that would obviously help with that, I just think I'm sure it's going to take off.
Yeah, fingers crossed we'll see. Definitely excited, nervous, excited, but yeah, that's
Just like me. Like we talk a lot about like how we're both freaking out, but it's like, oh my god, this is gonna be great. But like,
yeah, literally. It's very nerve-wracking, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I love the slides as well, like the design of the slides. Was that Gamma?
Yes. Some stuff wasn't aligned, and I was a bit annoyed because I was seeing
I
it.
didn't even notice. No, Gamma's great. I love Gamma. Yeah, guys, when you have to do presentations, you'll definitely have to do that. But I mean, I hope this was quite a, interesting enough sort of insight into what it's like to be a PM, because these ceremonies will take up most of your calendar. Sprint planning in reality takes like 3 hours sometimes. I worked at a company where sprint planning was the whole day. I worked at a company where sprint planning ran over 2 days. So maybe you do 3 hours on the Monday and then another 3 hours on the Tuesday, because you have to talk in depth with the developers. But in reality, some of the challenges with this is also like the personalities that you're working with. The developers will probably hate your guts. It's very rare to see a company where the developers get so along with the PM. And that's just because, well, honestly, most people will hate your guts, maybe except the C-suite, because at the end of the day, you're translating what the developers are saying to them. So the developers kind of hate your guts because it's like, oh, she's telling us what to do, but she can't actually do it herself. Or, they just have whatever imaginary reason. It could just be their personality. And I also think that there is an archetype of a personality that goes into software development that is very hard to work with. And this is me just being objective. They're not the easiest or like the most extroverted or people that exist. So these are some of the things that you'll have to contend with. And yeah, sprint planning is long, like I said. Daily scrum, that's like a 15-minute thing. Cool. Some companies you don't even always have to be there, even though it's highly recommended. Sprint reviews, I think you're kind of, I don't know, because I've been in companies where they didn't exactly use that name, sprint reviews, but it's like a show and a tell. For some companies.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's how you do it, isn't it? But I've been in some companies where they think sprint reviews is basically looking back on the sprint, so like a retrospective. But most of the time it's like a show and tell, and everybody gets to like comment on the features and like the bugs and stuff. So yeah, no, this is definitely a very good insight, but you will have to like do a lot of failing and learning by yourself. What I did just want to finally say is that from next week, and this is up to you guys, you can choose to do Monday or Thursday, but we'll have to go with what the majority chooses because there's only one slot available, and then we'll have to like split that. So on Mondays, let's just say, and then let me know if you'd rather do Thursday. What we'll do is have like a 45-minute session where we essentially use these tools to actually build Summon. So Summon is going to be released soon, so there's no actual need there, but we'll kind of just be like fake, I guess, building it so that you have practical examples of what that's like. So I will share right now the Figma with you guys. Let me know if you can actually see what's on the link. Is it visible? No, you can't get in? That's weird.
It's just loading for me.
Oh, okay. Has anybody tried to get in?
Oh, I can see it. I can see it now. It's like an envelope and it says touch me.
Okay, well, zoom out. I don't think you should have landed there. Okay, I can see you guys, I think. Anonymous. So if you go to the top, if you just scroll to the top, now this is Figma, which if you're not familiar with, this is what designers use to, build out the product. And this is like each screen at the top is like each step of what every user will encounter when they are using the platform. And so the designers will build it step by step according to your sort of like instructions or the tickets that you write and things like that. So yeah, we're going to go into a little bit of detail for the next 5 minutes, but I also don't want to keep Teniola because I know that she's super busy. So if you guys want to connect with Teniola, where can they find you? How do
You
they
can
email?
Email me, Christiana@chatkyc.ai.
Amazing. Could you pop that into the
Yes, I'll actually share the I'll share the presentation with you, Barbie.
Yes,
Because
amazing.
it's got templates and other stuff in it as well. If there's any other questions, let me know. Like I'm happy to answer any now before I drop off.
Amazing, yeah. And if you want to, you know what, you could just send that to me because I always send out like a
Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you.
Thing, yeah.
Any other questions before we round up?
I was just going to ask in terms of connecting with you, Christiana, if you have a LinkedIn or anything that we can...
Yes, I do. I'll share my LinkedIn actually. I didn't even think of that. I don't know why. Hold on. 2 seconds. Okay. 1 second. I haven't even used my LinkedIn in a while. I need to update it, but I'll send it to Barbie. It'll be on the presentation and I'll send it through.
No worries, thank you.
You are welcome. Any other questions? I hope everything was clear. If you do have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to clarify anything. It's quite difficult to summarize in 40 minutes, but yeah, I'm happy to clarify anything that wasn't clear. Obviously, my details will be on the presentation. So if there's anything on the presentation that you found like confusing or you want more clarity on, just send me a message and I'll get back to you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I appreciate you being here, and hopefully maybe we'll have you soon again.
Yeah, sure, I'll be happy to. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll put all the details on the presentation when Barbie sends it round, so feel free to connect.
Thank you.
Please speak to you all soon. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so really quickly, the Figma, like I said, this is what the UX designers use, and they will design everything according to your specifications. So what I would like us to do is, first of all, before the next session, potentially, let us try to, I don't want to say write tickets off this, but let's just try and maybe go on Jira. Have you guys seen Jira before? Just go on jira.com. create an account on Jira.com so that we're all ready to go in the next session. Jira will give you like a 30-day trial. So it's like free for 30 days. And Jira is essentially just for you to write tickets on. So in our session on Monday, I will show you how to write those tickets, the different tickets for like bugs, features, and stuff like that. But definitely just get ready in terms of like reading the material for understanding how a feature is written or how a bug is written so that we can move very quickly because it's a practical session. And then when we finish writing those tickets on Jira, because essentially the way that works is we'll go back to the Figma and we will write tickets for each page, so each thing. So actually bear with me so that this makes sense when I'm showing you. So you see how we have this first frame here. I don't know if you guys can see my screen, but I'm just hoping that you can.
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. So what we'll do with the ticket is essentially write whether it's like well, it's not going to be a bug ticket, is it? So this is like a feature ticket or a task ticket where we're saying on the first frame, as a user, I would like to sign up for Summon. And so we explain how the ticket should work on the first frame. So we would say we're asking the user their name and we're asking the user their email. Then the next ticket will essentially cover this, like how does the user verify? So email verification, implement email verification. We're going on and we're saying, you know, give the user two options between a serious relationship and an open relationship. We're going to this section here where you have the lightning round and saying when the user is presented with this screen, then it should start a countdown for 10 seconds, you know, things like that. So every single thing on the page, on each frame needs to be written as a ticket, right? Who pays on the first date, you know, implement who pays on the first date page. It should have a silhouette. It should have the home screen, that sort of thing. So we're going to look into all of that and we're going to cover that in our Jira writing. To give you a quick idea of what Jira looks like, this is it right here. So these are the tickets that my co-founder has already done. He's marked them as done. When you want to create a ticket, if you want to try this at home, like if you want to just try this in your free time, what you can do is just click on create. This is the home screen for Jira. So you just click on create. You select the kind of ticket. Let's say it's a story or a task. You say implement email verification, you know, and then you write the details for how the ticket should work. But that's okay, you don't have to try it at home. But essentially, this is what the practical side of things is going to look like. And it's going to run for the next 4 Mondays or 4 Thursdays. So it's up to you guys, whichever one the majority chooses. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Yes, sorry. Two quick questions. One is, as I'm looking at the screen showing the different pages of Summon, when I was reading about tickets during our last session, it kind of seemed to be around problems, whereas these already kind of seem like solutions. Should we be writing it as if we're trying to solve the problem from before, or should we be writing it just try to look for problems in this, which already seems like it's pretty great?
Yeah, so what we'll be doing, essentially, in reality, you won't have the designs already done for you. You will have to be writing tickets kind of blindly without seeing what it's actually doing, right? So there'll be like a step-by-step sort of thing going on. But in this case, we already have the designs. So the real goal of these tasks is for you to learn how to write the tickets, right? And then maybe just start to form some thinking around product and design thinking. So what we'll be doing is coming at it from the problem, because a ticket should always be a problem, but essentially think about the developer when you're writing the ticket. Don't think about like the whole team. So think about, what does the developer need to know to implement this ticket? And they just, when it gets to the developer, you have to assume that at that point they have the designs and they also have the ticket. So that's usually how it happens. The process is you write a ticket with the designer then produces the design, and then it goes to the developer. So we are writing tickets for the developers, and yes, they should always be from the problem angle.
Great, thank you.
No worries. You said there were 2 questions.
Oh, the only other thing is next Monday,
Mhm.
I can't be here, but all of the other Mondays I can. So
Yeah,
if
no worries.
it works out to be Monday, then I'm only not here just because I can't on that one. But it would be great if it was Thursday, but no pressure for everyone else.